Hey everybody, this is Leon the Star, and in today's video, part 1 of the Hello Soundfonts series, we're gonna explore whether Soundfonts can help us address some complexity issues in the today's music making landscape. I also hope to inspire you with the fact that MIDI is actually a very young protocol. It's a very young standard, and it will probably take us into new directions in the future. And there might be a lot of things you're doing these days which will now be best practices, but later will be worst practices. So let's start with the basics. So there was a time when a lot of MIDI complexity was actually made simple, and this was in the era of the general MIDI sound modules, where you would have one small box like a sound canvas, or Yamaha also had some, Korg had some, and in this box there would basically be a mini studio, and this studio would be the same across different brands, different companies. This was a really like a standard on paper, and this was pretty impressive, because what you would get in such a box was basically a standardized 16-channel mixer. You would have some effects, and everything would be MIDI controllable, and you could have like multiple banks and patches. So you could call it like multiple Ableton sessions in one. A lot of Ableton sessions in one. And you could switch them on the fly. Bam, bam, bam. It's super fast. So this solved basically in the box live performance. This solves also out of the box live performance, because you could choose to not use the internal sounds, or you could choose to send them out via a MIDI cable. And the best of all is that all of this goodness could be archived in one file, in a MIDI file. So this is a very impressive milestone in history, I think, where different companies were sort of aiming for the same standards. And of course you had a bit of differences between, if you would take your MIDI file to another sound module and play it there, it would sound a little bit different. However, this is, I think, the smallest problem of the whole thing. Like, if you look at the big picture, being able to put a studio in a MIDI file and bring it somewhere else and play it there, maybe fine-tune the sounds a bit, that is pretty impressive. So what I personally gravitated towards was like all-in-one solutions. I have had like a MIDI studio with a lot of devices, samplers, cables, and a mixer. I really loved it, but at some point it can also become a burden. So at some point I started to gravitate towards all-in-one devices like groove boxes and trackers, where you could basically have your score and your samples in one. Because these sound modules, even though they solved a lot of stuff, I could not modify the sound module with my own samples or my own. Well, there was a little bit of sound design you could do on the box, but I really wanted just to import a simple vocal or something. And that was not really doable. Of course, there were samplers, but that sort of kind of like trapped me back into a full-fledged MIDI studio with a separate mixer, separate routing, effects, etc. So at some point, I gravitated towards these things, and I really love it. You have like one file with your whole song in it, and this is really great. It's checking a lot of boxes. However, there were some things I was now missing. In other words, there wasn't the program change. I couldn't just change to a next song with the MIDI program change controller. And I could also not have banks and instruments. Basically, these sort of like all-in-one devices acted more like a song maker rather than an instrument, and that was a bit of a pain in the ass if you think about out-of-the-box live performance and you wanted to integrate with other instruments or sequencers, etc. Then yeah, maybe you get a little bit of a sync features or a little bit of let's say program change, but it would be very sort of like an afterthought. It would not be the goal of this application or Groovebox, because they're mostly designed to be an all-in-one solution, and once you want to go beyond that and sort of integrate it, then it can become quite hairy pretty quickly. Then we have stuff like the DAWs, like Ableton, with a lot of plugins, and of course this is amazing, this is very impressive, and this is sort of a rabbit hole which is infinite. You could, you know, create a lot of music forever and experiment forever in these things. And I think they solved a lot of things, especially the in-the-box live performance, out of the box as well. Like if we talk about portability and you want to send some kind of live performance to another person, then if you just use the stock or the native plugins, then this is a very portable way to collaborate. However, I do think that this the market of plugins and DAWs became so saturated that the competition really seems to take place in the plugins, interfaces, how great they look, and it seems a bit like these companies don't have really time to really think about standards. What I want to show to you is that this typical sort of like hybrid setup you see these days promoted, it basically ends up being something else, a sort of inferior setup. And it's basically a bit like this. Usually it's a setup which has very shallow use of MIDI. So the program change controller of MIDI usually doesn't work. Like many times you get conflict. So let's say your Electribe, your first pattern, program change value 1, starts at 1, but on another device, pattern 1 is some kind of read-only preset, some kind of demo preset. So this is already causing a problem. Now you no longer can use your program change because now you have to go remap things or whatever. So it's a bit of a illusion and a bit of a fake sale to say like, yeah, well, you can just remap those things. That's not a problem. I think that's a bit of a fake solution. It's selling you complexity. So basically the whole point of a setup like this is that, you know, rich MIDI is hard work. If you have 1 or 2 devices, you probably can manage, but the moment you add a bit more, you know, things get very hairy very quickly, and then you start to think like, maybe in the box isn't that bad. So there is this feeling I am getting many times, is that once I exceed a certain threshold of MIDI devices, things get really hard very quickly. So what if I just take a standard which really takes MIDI seriously as a sort of starting point? You know, what would that bring me? So this is where I basically end up in this kind of paradigm, where I would start thinking as the Soundfont file as a central repository of my gear, my instruments. And this is a completely different paradigm, because once it is inside a Soundfont, it will be compatible with like everything MIDI, it won't be shallow MIDI. It would actually be a very rich MIDI. So I would be able to, you know, embed my own sounds. I would be able to shape them and, you know, create modulators which basically tell the sound how to respond to CCs. I would instantly have banks and patches. So the moment I press program change on a groove box, then it would instantly change to that box without loading. Bam, it's like immediately working. So I'm really curious what this will bring me. I was even thinking, as I'm displaying in this image, to just start with one patch which has various zones. So it has a, let's say, a synthesizer on the first octave, another synthesizer on the other octave, then some drum sounds on the middle octave, and sort of create a whole palette of sounds, and then basically make a pattern with that patch, and perhaps create a whole album just with that palette of sounds. Because why would I, you know, for every song use completely different instruments? There's a certain there's something beautiful in having a certain palette, choosing sounds which sort of go together very well, and then, you know, use that patch as a starting point for an album where you basically create multiple songs with the same patch. So yeah, this could be so high level and so portable that I have all these possibilities, you know, from the start. And I think that is a very, very attractive starting point compared to, you know, cherry picking some plugins, cherry picking some hardware devices, which you can still do. But I'm thinking of like, why don't I just sample stuff into a sound font and, you know, have that central sound font as my portable studio. Another thing what I also like about Soundfonts is that the fact that, like, all the stuff I'm usually doing with a sound, which is the attack, decay, the release, I modify these things, some filtering, that's usually what I do when I want to make a song. And it's also, you know, it works. So I am thinking about this idea of a sound font controllable by a MIDI file, which is a great archive format, and go from there. I don't know, you know, how much friction this will cause, because this, you know, instead of, you know, solving all these you know, MIDI configuration issues, which I normally have with the hardware MIDI paradigm, or the plugin plumbing and routing, what you would do in a DAW. I don't know, you know, how it compares to that, because I need to get those sounds into the sound font. So I'm not sure about that. Let me know what you think. But I'm going in this thinking direction right now. So I also noticed that when it comes to sound font, there is a huge compatibility available. There's an engine called Fluid Synth, which seems to be, according to my research, the gold standard of replaying sound fonts. And this engine is embedded in a lot of commercial and free products. So there is, I noticed there is, for example, a Juicy SF, Juicy Sound Font. It is a VST plugin which works in all DAWs. It's free, and it has all these standard mappings like the attack, decay, sustain, release, filter cutoff, and the banks, the program change, all that stuff on 16 channels. It has it like it's sort of like supported out of the box. It also runs on iOS devices, Android devices, so you can get a free player. You can even modify the code. You can turn it into a Raspberry Pi and create some kind of your own groove box. I find this very attractive for some reason. I find this a really cool starting point. So yeah, this is very interesting. Another thing I noticed is that MIDI is sort of getting a reboot in the last years. So some people say that MIDI is old, but I would say MIDI is very young. It's just, you know, it was just invented in the 80s, and we're still basically monkeys flying an airplane here. We don't know what we're doing. We're just doing stuff, trying stuff. And I think this MIDI standard, it will really get a lot of reboots, because at some point the complexity gets so big that it's becoming a trap. And I think we're at that stage. I think something like Ableton is amazing, but at the same time also overwhelming and incredibly, it can look very complex for a lot of people. If you would just open up a random Ableton video as a new user, you would probably think like, maybe I should buy a keyboard, like a normal keyboard, and just not think about this computer stuff. So I'm really curious what will come out of this MIDI 2.0 standard. I did notice not only having more resolution, basically finer control of your faders, etc., or your keys, but I also noticed like a new way for MIDI files to sort of contain more information, clips, for example, like you would see in Ableton. You have clips, like you could basically save that into the MIDI file as well. And what I also noticed is that SEC66, which is a pretty cool sequencer, this sequencer, check it out, it's very sort of simple from the start, and it is a bit of a Groovebox workflow in the sense that you have clips and but yeah, without going too much into detail, it basically allows you to save the clips and all that you know, software specific data into a MIDI file as well. So I was surprised to see that it can do so many things. You can have playlists,